Back in time she was a child, Eiri-Nox. When torn from her homeworld Vey'Naris during a covert human raid, her consciousness fractured and buried in a containment chamber forgotten by time. When Eiri awakens, the accord breaks, war ignites, and Earth prepares a final weapon. Project Thanasil 773. In the 6th sector of the Centauri Drift, beneath a sky smeared violet by the dying light of twin suns, the humans arrived with silk words stitched into steel promises. And the galaxy listened because they had learned to speak beautifully after centuries of silence, not because they were trusted. Ambassador Draven Kael stood at the center of the summit on Evan 4, a diplomatic moon carved entirely from crystal and coded language. He was the kind of man who made lies sound like lullabies, tall, smooth-spoken, with a smile that could make a tribunal hesitate to sentence a war criminal if he said the word mercy the right way. His eyes had no color, no soul, just steel reflecting back whatever the other wanted to see. He had no history, only classified files. Earth had made him, and he had never questioned why. Seated 5 seats away, in the shadowed gallery, Thyravish of the Gilari observed him with the quiet intensity of a soul that had survived extinction and still chose grace over rage. Her kind had lived longer than Earth had known fire, with faces carved like wind-shaped glass and voices that remembered the echo of dying stars. She was a historian, not a warrior, but her words carried weight heavier than most ships. She had come because she had to, because no one else would say it, and across the silver floor beneath them, locked behind layered smiles and encryption walls, the agreement was unfolding. Earth would gain access to transit corridors across 5 systems, trade rights with the Sivan Imperium, and shared data access with the Ekdar brainfolds. In return, they promised peace. They promised collaboration. They promised they would not touch the Forbidden's relics in vaults at Torsdraven, raised a crystalline goblet of Aerith wine, smiling as the chamber filled with ceremonial chords. I give you Earth's oath, unbroken and sacred. We come not to conquer, but to connect. We are no longer the savages we were when we first looked into the stars. We only ask to stand beside you, not above you. And those who did not know better, Thyra, did not. She turned to the Ekdar beside her, their massive neural lobes pulsing blue with silent contemplation. Your minds read potential futures. Did none of them show you how this ends? The Ekdar responded in scent, the language of their kind. Sour and slow, I saw hundreds. None were peace, but the accord signed anyway. Galactic protocol celebrated it. And the humans left with smiles, sharper than weapons. Their ships veiled in victory signals. What the Council did not see, what even the Ekdar minds could not predict, was that beneath Earth's prime research hub in the Orion Fringe, the Netherian core had already been removed from its vault. It had already spoken, and it had not spoken to a human voice far beneath the surface. Lit by green code and surgical lights, Kael Varian, commander of the Earth Stratus Guard, stood silently beside the core's containment column. He did not speak. His eyes, darker than his uniform, reflected the creature inside a being of fractured memory and humming light. Kael had always obeyed orders. He was raised to engineered too, but in the hum of the core, something familiar stirred a sound like breathing, a feeling like sorrow, a whisper that knew his name. And even before the war began, before betrayals shattered the fragile silence of peace, Kael Varian knew humanity had gone too far, and something would come to collect the debt, something that remembered everything. Corridors of Vault K-73 were not built to be seen. They were designed for containment, sterilized white from floor to ceiling, humming always with the quiet rhythm of data transfer and lit by a light that never cast shadows. This place existed beneath Earth's official records, buried beneath 60 kilometers of iron core rock, beyond the edge of law or conscience. Kael Varian walked those corridors without speaking, because silence was part of his training, and because no one here asked questions unless they wanted to disappear. He was tall, built with the exact symmetry the straightest guard demanded, and his blood carried traces of both human engineering and something older. He had stopped wondering what the something was years ago. At the end of Hall 9 stood Chamber Theta, a room so classified that only 3 people on Earth had access to it, and he was one of them. The walls were clear, but the thing inside could not be fully seen, only glimpsed in flickers of fractured light, an emotion that pulsed through the glass like a heartbeat too ancient to map. The Netherian core, and tonight it was not quieted, whispered not in sound, but in feeling, a shape pressed against Kael's chest, like memory clawing its way back into existence. He stood there longer than his schedule allowed, because in the pulse of the core, something called him by his forgotten name, the one not found in any Earth registry, something that remembered who he really was before the uniform far away. In the orbit of Nahus Prime, a single Xylari vessel shimmered into visibility. Its curves did not obey traditional physics, gliding more like thought than matter. At the helm stood Theravesh, cloaked in shadows of solar silk, her gaze locked to the orbit charts streaming across her interface. The coordinates were not official. They had been sent anonymously, unsigned, but she recognized the encryption. Kael Vey'Naris hadn't seen him in 6 years, not since the day he turned his back on the Yylari embassy and vanished into Earth's command structure, not since the night she had told him, "If you walk away, you will forget who you are." Not since the day he replied, "That's the point." Now he was calling again, and she had never stopped watching the stars, waiting for him to remember. Her ship descended silently into Earth's outer atmospheric blind zone, unseen by satellites. She landed just outside Vault Region Theta, because if Kael was reaching out, then something was broken, and when Kael Vey'Naris broke, entire systems followed inside the vault. Kael placed his palm against the containment glass. The core pulsed in response, flickering into a vague shape, 2 eyes, golden and endless, filled with sadness not its own. It spoke in silence, and Kael understood. It was not just a weapon. It was not just knowledge. It was a person, or what was left of one. Then the alarms went off. Unregistered energy surge detected. Kael's comms blinked. A single code VX9 Thyra. He should have reported it. He should have sounded the breach protocol. Instead, he whispered, "Too soon." Why now? And the core replied in images, memories of a war never recorded a face. Shilari, torn in anguish, a child screaming in silence, a ship marked with Earth's emblem burning above an unarmed colony. Kael stumbled back. He had not just seen history, he had remembered it, and in that moment, all the years of loyalty, obedience, and silence began to bleed drain on Earth's sector. Theta didn't fall like it used to. Now it came in chemical droplets, filtered through atmosphere regulators. That could only delay, not reverse the rot spreading across the sky. As Theravesh stepped out of her cloaked vessel, the synthetic mist curled around her robes, whispering across fabric that had been woven in silence centuries before. Earth's species had learned to speak. She did not run. She did not hide. She walked calmly toward Vault K-73's outer perimeter. And every camera that should have blinked red didn't, because Kael Vey'Naris had turned them all off inside. Kael stood in the override chamber, his fingers motionless above the touch plate. He wasn't thinking like a soldier now. He was thinking like the boy who used to ask why certain species weren't allowed to speak in Earth's councils. The man who once woke sweating from dreams of screaming in a language he was never taught. When the door slid open and she stepped through, no alarm screened, just silence, like the kind found at the edges of galaxies where light never reaches. They didn't speak at first. Her eyes locked onto his uniform. The insignia, glowing faint blue, and Earth symbol, meant to represent unity, but now looked to her like a chain link. She whispered, "You called me." Kael nodded, voice caught between memory and duty. "I think they lied to me, Thyra. I think I helped them do things I'll never forgive." She didn't embrace him. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked to the glass, where the Netherian core pulsed slowly in crimson. Her hand hovered close. "It's alive." Kael didn't ask how she knew, because he had seen it too, a flickering shape. Within the core, sometimes childlike, sometimes too vast to hold a name, had spoken to them both, in ways no human tech could ever explain. Thyra turned to him, voice low. "Do you know where they got it?" He hesitated, then answered, "Recovered it from a derelict orbit near the Oryx graves." "At least that's what they told us." She shook her head. "They took it from Vey'Naris. That planet wasn't a grave. It was a sanctuary." Her words were not anger. They were mourning, and in her voice, Kael finally felt what it meant to betray something older than trust. "I was briefed. It was inert. That the I couldn't activate without an interface." His voice cracked. "But it started talking to me. I didn't report it. I couldn't. It said my name. It doesn't speak names unless it remembers you." Thera's gaze sharpened. "There's Zilari coding in your blood. That's why it knows you. You were never just human, Kael." He looked away, eyes drawn to the interface logs scrolling across the chamber walls, surveillance images, experiments, dissections of other relics, even an attempt to simulate the cores. Memory using cloned neural patterns. Project NV. He whispered, engineered neural vessel. And then he saw the file marked Eiri-Nox age, 7 cycles origin, Vey'Naris, presumed deceased. A child laughing under trees that glowed from within, screaming as she was pulled into light, torn apart by machines, searching for what made her different. The core wasn't just a weapon. It was her. It was Eiri-Nox, or the fragments of her spirit. That survived the extraction. Thyra was watching him. "You understand now, don't you?" Kael looked back at the glass, at the ghost child flickering in red and violet, and something inside him collapsed. "We didn't steal a weapon," he whispered. "We murdered a mind." But before either of them could act, the door behind them opened, and in walked General Solari Hex, flanked by Earth's blackside operatives in armor, built for war inside sealed environments. Solari's smile never touched his eyes. "Well, well. Looks like I just caught myself a traitor and a fugitive in the same chamber." Thyra stepped in front of Kael, her voice like ice. "If you activate it, you'll destroy more than yourselves. It will unravel everything." She doesn't know how. To stop feeling, Solari raised his weapon. "Good. Let her feel what vengeance tastes like." And then the core screamed. The scream wasn't sound. It didn't bounce off the walls or rupture the glass. It bypassed ears and flesh and cut straight into the marrow, into memory, into the spaces of the mind where language couldn't reach. Everyone in that room dropped to their knees, except for Kael. And that was the moment he knew it wasn't just remembering him. It was holding on to him. The core flared in blinding white for a heartbeat. All the systems in Vault K-73 died emergency. Power failed, containment protocols vanished. The cameras melted in static, and Eiri-Nox, the mind within the Netherian core, rose from the pulsing red shell like the ghost of a future undone. She did not speak in words. She spoke in images of a mother whose face she barely remembered, of stars she once danced beneath on Vey'Naris, of white-suited humans with masks that didn't blink, and machines that took things she could never name. She didn't remember dying, only being torn, fragmented, saved in shards. And now she remembered everything. General Solari Hex stumbled to his feet, hand reaching for the pulse. Cannon on his belt. "I gave the order to keep it sedated." Who authorized a full interface? Kael stood slowly. "I didn't. And then I think she did." Eiri-Nox's shape flickered into a child for one breath, then into something taller, sharper, surrounded by gravitational distortion. Her mind was expanding, spilling into the vaults. AI systems overriding failsafe's rewriting protocol in real-time. Thyra grabbed Kael's wrist, yanking him toward the exit. She's not just awakening. She's anchoring herself to the power grid. If she spreads through the relay towers, she'll reach orbital uplink within minutes. Kael didn't move. He was still watching her. She's in pain. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's trying to understand why it hurts so much. Vault-shook systems exploded in sparks. A security drone melted mid-air. Then 3 more detonated as Eiri-Nox pulsed a wave of raw temporal distortion. Aging everything metal by 100 years in a second, Solari shouted into his comm. Command! Lock down Sector Theta. Prepare orbital strike if necessary. But Earth Command didn't respond, not because they refused, but because Eiri-Nox had already silenced them. Outside the vault, the ground cracked beneath the reinforced titanium crust, ancient wiring twisted and liquefied, and the Netherian core began to rise, not float rise, lifting itself from its holding cradle, with gravity shattering around it. Kael turned to Thyra. We need to disconnect her from the planetary grid, and if we do that, she collapse. Thayra's voice was steady. But if we don't, she'll collapse everything else. Kael looked down at his palm, still glowing faint red. The core had marked him, chosen him. He was the only neural match. Let me talk to her. No one controls her now. I'm not trying to control her. His eyes burned with something Thayra had not seen since they were young compassion. He stepped forward, 1 pace. 2 Solari shouted something again, but Kael couldn't hear it. Everything around the core was slowing down. Even time bent gently, like fabric caught in wind, and Kael reached out. Eiri, I know you don't remember me. Not really. But I remember you. I remember Vey'Naris before it burned. I remember the song your people sang when the sun fell behind the mirror fields. I remember you laughed when you shouldn't have. You told me starlight didn't belong to anyone. He stepped closer. I think they tried to turn you into a weapon. But I don't think you want to destroy us. I think you want to be understood. Her shape flickered, stabilized. Then tears formed where her eyes should have been. I waited. The voice didn't come from her mouth. It came from everywhere from the metal, from Kael's mind, from the air itself. I waited so long. I waited and no one came. I'm here now. Kael's voice cracked behind them. Solari fired a sonic bolt meant to paralyze Kael. It never reached him. Ares' energies snapped at mid-air, then folded Solari into time. For a moment, he vanished, then reappeared as a withered husk, falling to the ground in a heap of aged armor and dust. Kael didn't flinch. He just kept looking at her. Let us help you. Let me help you. The core dimmed, the tremors stopped. Above Earth, in the orbital rings, the transmission had already begun. Eiri had left fragments of herself in the satellites, in the deep codes, in the gravity beams, and across the galaxy. Accord began to hear her cry. The first to respond was not human. It was the Jilari, and they did not send word. They sent warships. The first world to burn was Rontal, a moon city orbiting the twin gas giants of Sector 9 Kareth, once known for its translucent seas and wind-crafted crystal towers that sang when the dusk hit them just right. It had no military stations. It held no weapons. But it was where Earth's top xenogenetic labs had secretly exported alien tissue for unauthorized replication programs. So the Xylari chose it for a message. They did not give warnings. They gave fire. 3 ships descended in silence. Their hulls shimmered with starlight memory plating, defensive armor created from fallen quasars and dark matter skin. And when they opened their mouths to speak, they didn't speak sound. They sang a morning hymn. The towers cracked mid-note. The oceans boiled in under 6 minutes. All organic matter reduced to ash, then dust, then absence. Back on Earth, the orbital command tower was in chaos. High Admiral Reyndal's voice was hoarse from screaming overcomes Earth's fleets were too slow, too uncoordinated, too arrogant to prepare for war with a race that had lived 10,000 wars before Earth, had even built its first telescope in the shadows of the ruined vault K-73. Kael Varian stood watching the chaos unfold on a flickering holodisplay. He had not changed clothes. His armor was burnt, fractured down the left side. Blood, someone else's, streaked his jaw. His eyes were different now. They no longer searched for orders, only answers. Beside him, Thyravesh watched the orbital. Feeds. She said nothing, because she had seen this coming long before Kael believed her. Earth will retaliate. Kael's voice was hollow. Thyra looked at him sideways. Against what? The Accord has already fractured. The Xylari control 5 of the 7 deep space gates now. You can't fight a war with planets if you can't reach them. We'll use the Netherian core again. You try that, she said, voice low, steady, and you will lose her. Forever. They both looked toward the stasis chamber, where Eiri-Nox now rested. Her physical form was still contained in quantum suspension, her mind tethered to Kael's through the neural bridge she had grafted without asking. She wasn't speaking anymore. She was watching. Every feed, every strike, every betrayal. She's afraid, Kael whispered. But not of the Xylari, not of death. Teyra nodded slowly. She's afraid of becoming what we tried to make her. Outside, skies that had once welcomed only satellites now brimmed with tension. The Astral Lance Fleet, Earth's most elite orbital division, had been dispatched with clearance for Spear protocol target and neutralize all non-human combatants within. Communication range of Earth-controlled sector scale watched the order on the screen, his own authorization code embedded in the sequence. I didn't sign this. Thera turned toward him, eyes hard. They don't need your signature anymore. You've been erased. You just haven't seen the paperwork. Kael's fists clenched. He had given everything, his loyalty, his silence, his name, and in the end, Earth had used him like a key and discarded him like a tool. But he was done obeying Asterisk. They'll strike. Iverith's Rim next, Thera said, pulling up the Alliance encryption logs. It's not a military post, it's a Xylari temple world. Half of it is buried in Thought Crystal, where our dead live on. They'll attack anyway. Because they don't understand what we protect. Kael turned to the stasis chamber. Ares' glow dimmed. Not weak, just watching, learning, and perhaps waiting. He stepped forward, placed his hand against the glass. If I link with her again, if I let her open the channel between minds, we might convince them to stop. At least enough to fracture the chain of command. Thyra looked at him long. You do that, she will see everything inside you. Everything you've done. Everything you regret. I know. You might not come back. He nodded. I know. Chamber hissed. The neural bridge activated. His body went limp as light swallowed him, and Kael Varian fell into a mind that had once been a child, was now a storm, and might become a god inside. There was no ground, no sky, just memory screaming in. Every direction, and in the middle, Ares stood barefoot alone, her voice a whisper of old songs. Why did they lie? Kael stepped toward her, and for the first time, he didn't answer as a soldier. He answered as a man broken enough to understand, because they were afraid of what you'd become. He paused, but I'm not, and behind them stars flickered. Out one by one Kael Varian fell through memory like glass, falling through fire, each shard a moment, each crack a scream, and all of them leading back to Eiri-Nox, stood not as a child now, but as a shape of shifting light and form. Something more ancient than she ever had the right to be. She was still the girl who had played beneath Vey'Naris skies. Yes, but now her eyes reflected systems dying, and her soul was made from stolen futures. They stood together in the space between thought and time, where Gata bled like veins and pasts reassembled themselves as if begging to be understood. "Why did they hurt me, Kael?" she asked, her voice not angry, not yet only lost. "They didn't understand what you were," he said. "They didn't even try. You saw." She whispered, "I let you see. I let you feel the burning of the forest. I let you feel when they pulled me apart." A flicker of a scream echoed behind her eyes. "You didn't stop them." Kael's breath caught. "I didn't know. And then I chose not to know." Her expression didn't shift, but the light around her began to fracture. "Then you are like them." "No," he said. "No, I was. But I'm not anymore behind them." Fragments of her broken mind formed the shapes of bodies that children Earth had experimented on. The relics turned into cores, the sacred memories they tried to bottle and control. Every one of them screamed, without mouths, and she remembered them all. "I'm not a weapon," she said, "but they made me one anyway." "You're not," Kael said, stepping closer. "You're not just a collection of pain. You're still the child who sang to stars. I heard you. You're still in there." She turned away from him, and the world of her memory began to collapse outside. The neural bridge, in the real world, Thanasil, watched as Kael's body arched in. Pain, his vitals spiked sweat, poured down his face as if the weight of Eiri's grief had turned his own blood into guilt. He wasn't just connected to her now. She was inside him and in orbit above Earth. A new emergency had taken shape, the dread. Protocol. A weapon never made public, known only to the Council of 13, who governed Earth's strategic defense. A failsafe meant not to destroy planets, but to erase them from memory, codenamed Project Thanasil 773. Once activated, it would deploy quantum memory viruses across interstellar lines, erasing all traces of a civilization, not physically, but historically. A civilization that no longer existed in thought, would cease to matter, would cease to be, and Earth was preparing to aim. It had Xylari core worlds inside the neural world. Kael fell to his knees. Eiri's mind was shaking. She was beginning to fracture from the weight of vengeance. He crawled to her and whispered, "If you destroy them, you become what they feared. But if you forgive them, if you choose something different, you become something they can't control. You become better." She stared at him, confused, flickering between sorrow and rage. "I don't want to be better." He reached out. "I know, but I do. And I want you to live, not as a weapon, not as revenge, but as someone who deserved more, something cracked, soft, small, a single thread of gold light in the storm." And her voice broke. "I'm afraid." He held her. "I am too." And just then, the system pulsed an emergency override, engaged. Thera's voice screamed from the interface, "Kael, they're activating Project Thanasil 773. It's happening. They'll erase the Xylari from history." Eiri's eyes widened. She looked up, and her light pulsed like a rising storm. Kael grabbed her shoulders. "No, you can't let them turn you into that. Let me go back. I'll stop it. I'll stop them. All." She looked at him one last time, and for the first time she smiled, faint but real then. She let him go. Kael's body jerked upright. He gasped like a man pulled from drowning. Thyra caught him. "You with me?" He nodded, weak, barely standing. "We need to get to Black Spire Command. That's where Thanasil's launch control is buried." Thyra armed her sidearm. "Then we run. We run like the future depends on it." And above them, the countdown began. 1098, the end of memory. The death of a people. The final sin of their species. The desert around Black Spire Command stretched in every direction like scorched bone. The sky above it, not sky at all, but a dome of reinforced atmosphere shielding the most secure installation on Earth. This was where truths went to rot, where orders were forged in blood, where the dead didn't haunt because there was no room for ghosts-only protocol. Pale Varian stumbled through the Axis corridor with his hand pressed against his ribs, blood soaking through the side of his uniform, where the neural strain had torn something deep. Beside him, Thyravesh moved with the cold precision of someone who had spent her life watching wars begin with silence. No alarm sounded. No guards blocked them, not because no one was watching, but because Eiri-Nox was still with them. Still. Inside every satellite, every security drone, every hidden camera watching from dark corners, and for now, she held them all still. Reached the launch chamber's final threshold, a 40-foot wall of gravimetric steel, etched with Earth's defense. Sigil, pulsing red as the countdown ticked beneath it. 0 hours 3 minutes and 19 seconds. 3 minutes until the Thanasil memory virus would launch. 3 minutes until history itself would become a weapon. Thyra pulled a pulse driver from her belt. We breach here. After that, it's not negotiation. It's stop them or die. Kael said nothing, his jaw clenched. But his eyes weren't looking at the door. They were watching the screen. The authorization codes scrolling down the side of the launch log he read. It twice, then whispered, "No." Thyra stepped closer. "What is it?" He pointed, and there, beneath the primary key, the initials burned K. V. Kael Varian. "I never signed this," he said, the color draining from his face. "That's not my command key." It's a clone," Thyra said flatly. "Earth's been building neural twins since the War of Synchrony. They must have copied your neural print during your final clearance cycle." Kael staggered. His knees almost gave. "They're using my identity to justify genocide. They always were," Thyra said. "You just finally saw it." She fired the blast. From the pulse driver exploded the entrance. The metal screamed, the door crumpled inward, and the room beyond opened like a wound inside. 15 command operatives turned in unison, eyes wide with disbelief, and at the center seated in the master chair was a man who looked like Kael, but colder, sharper polished into perfection, the clone Kael V2. Zero, Earth's obedience-engineered replica. He turned to the original with a smirk. Kael knew too well. "You were the trial. I'm the control." Kael raised his weapon. The clone did not flinch. "You weren't made to think." The clone said, "You were made to feel so they could test emotional variables. They called you the Gray Variant. They didn't think you'd survive past loyalty phase 3. Kael's hand trembled. "You're going to erase an entire people. They're a threat to Earth's supremacy," the clone said. "They remember things Earth wants forgotten. They know things we should never have let them live to teach others." The countdown blinked 0 hours 2 minutes and 4 seconds. Kael looked around the room, and for a moment, it was just like the day he joined the Stratus Guard, when he thought serving Earth meant saving. Something now he realized he had been protecting a graveyard, and every oath he had sworn had been written in someone else's blood. "I am not your trial version." Kael stepped forward, and for the first time in his life, he aimed to kill not as a soldier, but as a man reclaiming his name. They fired at the same time. 2 pulse rounds crossed in the air. Kael's hit center mass. The clone's hit shoulder, but Kael kept walking even as his blood ran. Even as the clone collapsed, he reached the console, but the screen was locked too late to override. Thera screamed from behind. "Kael, the launch key is still active." Kael placed his hand on the console, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Eiri, I need you, in orbit, inside the satellites across deep code networks." She heard him, and in that final second, she made a choice. She did not erase the command. She rewrote the target. The pulse virus never struck Xylari space. It struck Earth's own memory cores, erasing every record of Project Thanasil 773. Every experiment, every lie. The systems burned from within, and the chamber went dark. Kael collapsed in his mind. He saw her one last time, Eiri-Nox, standing beneath starlight, smiling no longer. Afraid? I did it, she said. I chose something else, and Kael whispered, You wept? But you didn't become the storm. The skies above Earth were no longer blue. Where once sat proud defense satellites and glittering orbital towers, now hung nothing but drifting cinders slowly circling a planet that had silenced itself. Project Thanasil 773 was gone. Not just cancelled, not just destroyed, but erased. Its architects, its records, even the neural paths that once held the command sequences scrubbed clean, as if the sin had never been conceived. But the galaxy remembered. Because Eiri-Nox made sure of it. She had not spared Earth. She had rebalanced it. And as Kael Varian awoke 3 days later in the hidden sanctuary of the Zelari Tesseract Temple, his mind still echoing with fractured images of a child's laughter and a machine's sorrow, he realized what had been taken and what had been spared. Thyra was at his side, her robe stained from days without rest, her expression unreadable. He blinked, trying to sit up. What happened? After? You lived, she said it gently, as if that itself had defied all logic. Eri used you as a conduit, your DNA, your neural bond. She needed you to finish the rewrite. You gave her the only truth she never received from Earth Mercy. He nodded slowly, painfully. Did she survive? Thyra looked toward the temple's ceiling, where crystal threads glowed with colors not found on any Earth spectrum. She isn't gone. Not completely. The Zelari call it Iren, all the in-between. She became light, memory without body. She's in the lattice now, among the stars. Watching. Waiting. Kael closed his eyes. A single tear slid down. Unhidden. I thought I could. Save her. You did, Thyra whispered. Just not in the way you expected. Outside the temple, the galaxy was changing. The Accord had reformed, but not with Earth at its center. Earth had been sanctioned cut from the star maps, its name stripped. From diplomatic records, its colonies repossessed, its leaders abandoned by the very code they had once manipulated. And yet, it had not been destroyed, because Eiri-Nox had chosen to preserve what could still change. Kael stood at the temple's edge days later. A grove had begun to grow translucent trees of memory crystal that pulsed with quiet hums, each one holding pieces of Eiri's thoughts, her laughter, her rage, her hope. In Kael planted one more. It was small, barely taller than his waist, but its glow was strong. He pressed his hand to its core and whispered, She was a child who never got to grow up. A mind carved into pieces by fear. A light caged in silence. But she chose something else. She chose to stop the cycle. Thera stood behind him. What will you do now? Kael looked to the stars. They erased my name from Earth's records. Sighed I was compromised. Said I betrayed my command. He turned to her. But if that's true, then let the stars remember it, right? He kneeled and placed a carved stone at the root of the crystal tree. The name burned into it, not in English, but in Vey'Nari runes Kael. He remembered the weeping god and chose not to become one, and far above, in the quiet space between two stars, a flicker of golden light pulsed, just once, as if someone somewhere was smiling.